All right, Warriors of National Guard recruiting. We have the great opportunity to have a high-speed recruiter from the great state of New York with us. We have Sergeant Strong. And Sergeant Strong would just like to start off with kind of what is your National Guard journey that brought you to being a recruiter for your state?
Well, I've kind of always worked in customer service and everything like that throughout different aspects of my career. But when I decided to join the Army National Guard, originally it was for student loan repayment, and then I ended up falling into an MOS. I'm a 35 November, a signals intelligence analyst. I ended up falling into an MOS, not really understanding what that meant at the beginning, but this is the job I should have been doing my whole life, kind of thing. Um, when I was done with AIT, everything with COVID was going on, and I knew that I wanted to kind of stay in the Army, but I didn't want to just 368 and go to active duty. So I volunteered to be on orders as a recruiter's assistant to go talk to people, help out. I was working for absolutely phenomenal leadership and ended up learning a lot through that process as an assistant. And then the end of that year, they actually offered a position for me to have an RSID. So that's how I kind of ended up journeying through recruiting into what it is I do today.
Okay. Well, that's kind of an interesting MOS.
Yes, it is.
So you've had some success in recruiting, but
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the connections between that MOS that you picked up and what you do in recruiting? I think that's interesting.
Um, so I feel like a lot, if there's anything that I've taken away, not only from my schoolhouse, but my experience, I am part of a non-traditional National Guard unit. I'm part of the 10th Mountain McPod here in New York, which means that we belong to the 10th Mountain Division, basically. When I go to drill, it's not a traditional 1 week in a month drill or anything like that. It is, I go to Fort Drum and I work, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, whatever it is they need me to do. I'm considered division staff for the 10th Mountain Division for their G2. So I am one of the intelligence analysts for one of the signals intelligence analysts for division staff for 10th Mountain. So that's actually been a pretty interesting being ADOS and being an ADOS recruiter. I get to do a little bit of both. So not only do I get to do my MOS and my job and stuff, but I also get to go out and be on the streets and recruiting every day. So that's really cool. I get best of both worlds. So in my job, how I've been utilized, I should say, is a little bit more non-traditional with being an intelligence analyst. A lot of those people live in windowless rooms all day, but I actually get to brief higher ups in the G2 staff. Whether it was our commanding general at the time, I spent an entire 2 weeks doing nothing but briefing him every morning on what it is our operations were doing at the time in the place that we were operating, all the way down to how that translates to recruiting is, I'm comfortable talking to people, that it flows back and forth for me. It's probably the weirdest thing I think you probably heard from an intelligence analyst, because most of us are wall walkers and can't talk to people very well. But I've gotten really good at not only disseminating what people like, what it is that person needs to hear and in response to what they're asking, but also being able to quickly focus on and pick out like how I can help somebody. And I take that to recruiting with me.
Well, those are two really, really great points. Picking up what people want to hear
Yep.
and being able to present that when folks go to recruiting school, it's like identifying the want, need, and desire and matching the feature and benefit with it. So there is that connection with other jobs in the Army. Well, I'm curious of really for the people out there that listen to this podcast, it's what do you do to be successful as a recruiter? What's a day in your recruiting life like?
So I'm going to be very blunt and very honest here. There is no magic formula. I will tell you that at the beginning of this FY, after kind of last year, I was one of a few people in my company for recruiting to make mission. And even as a brand new baby E5 non-SQI4 recruiter, like I definitely sat there, and while it was a struggle for me to make mission, I got it done, because I'm not going to go out there and be assigned something and not do that job. So I struggled to figure out what was my method all year long last year. And this year, at the beginning of the going into this fiscal year, I said, I want to make mission. I want to make mission early. And I want to be able to not only do my mission, but the recruiter who sat in the same chair before me, who I've learned so much from, you know, the mission that was traditionally in that seat was, 15, 16, sometimes 17 people, depending on the year. But this year, New York was given between 12 and 14 as a mission. And I, as a non-SQI recruiter this year, was missioned at 13 people. Last year I did 12. I said this year I'm going to do 15. And keeping myself organized and setting that goal for myself at the beginning of the fiscal year, and telling myself realistically, look, this first quarter, I'm going to work 70, 60, 70, sometimes I was working 80 hours a week just to get everything done. If you look at the spread of where your people need to come from, and you really analyze what your area has produced historically, and you look at, okay, so I know that if I'm given a mission of 13, where are those people going to come from? And I really sat down and figured out how, not only where I needed people to come from, but what amount of my return on investment for my working that I needed to put in to make that happen. So I set those goals for myself, kept myself organized through the process, and realistically had that real chat with not only myself, but my family too, and said, hey, this first quarter and pretty much all the way up until like February, March, I'm going to be working. I'm going to be heavy working, and just being honest with everybody about that. It's really helped having, the family support and everything. They know that if I put in the hard work at the beginning of the year and I can make mission, then the rest of the year I can actually take and relax, enjoy the summer. That's realistically what I wanted to be able to do.
Wow. Wow. You have not been at this very long. And some people,
No,
some people spend a whole career and never figure out some of the things that you've already mentioned. One thing that I want to highlight is people do get into hot water at home because they don't have that conversation. And there is a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow of getting all the time back, but we don't have the conversations at the beginning of the year. And it really hurts people. We lose people in the organization because of that. And I do think what you've said is that there's a lot of wisdom into it. Just have the conversation, because our market is available for those 9 months of the school year for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So that's logical. And if we make our hay then we can give some back. So I wanted to highlight that. Also, on the analytical side, that's very astute. What you mentioned there is, okay, this is my battle space.
Yes.
This is what I got to work with. And within that space, where am I going to get those enlistments? Where are they going to be?
Yes.
Where have they been in the past? How can I be there first to get them, doing the most amount of recruiting in the highest productive area? That's something that people don't figure out either. Typically, it is a younger recruiter thinking, number one, I want to reach everybody all the time, and that is not going to happen. Number two, go to the yes when it comes to the school. So the small school is more likely to say yes.
They are. Yep.
So it's more likely to be less productive too. So I just want to highlight those things. It's a great benefit, especially new recruiters listening, that if you just look at that space and make a plan like that, and probably the last thing is make that commitment that I'm going to do this much work during this period of time because I know that's what it takes. That's really good stuff. That's very impressive. Did you have something to add to that?
I will say that I'm the type of person I am. I'm a complete sponge. So I do listen to the advice of others around me. Like I said, I've had absolutely phenomenal leadership. And we got a new company commander in this year, and I remember him very pointedly asking me. He was just like asking me about what was in my Wheaties, why was I doing so well compared to other recruiters, and I was just like, sir, if you let me do it the way I figured out what works for me, and I'm left alone to do it that way, I will be successful and I will continue to do this. And I said, sir, if realistically I become unsuccessful doing it my way, then by all means step in and teach me something different. Like that is the type of person I am. I'm a sponge. I want to learn all of the ways, because even if that particular method isn't going to work for me, some part of it might. So I do listen. I am that quiet person. I will sit in a corner of a room and I will listen to everybody around me, and I will pick up little bits and pieces. When we have our company conferences, I ask questions of, or the battalion conferences, I should say, I ask questions of folks from other companies to see what they're doing. I do pay attention. And I feel like there are little bits and pieces that I will bring to what my method is that help me. I have a very diverse area. I have both rural and pretty urban, a few pretty urban high schools. And when it comes to realistically looking at how to operate in both, like I grew up riding horses and doing agriculture and all of that. And then, bringing in the Army aspect and the other things that I've been able to do throughout my life. You have to be that chameleon and in your environment. And if you're going to actually own your battle space, then you have to sit yourself down and tell yourself how you're going to do that. Because not everybody is comfortable. Not everybody's from, the place that they're working. And that's one thing I hear a lot when I hear other recruiters saying, well, I don't live in my area. I'm not from my area. I'm from Arizona originally. So, when while I have been in New York for a while, learning my area and the different aspects of it, I remember getting laughed at because I was using my GPS last year a lot because I was like, I don't know how to get to this place. Where am I going? So they're like, oh, you just got to drive around and really learn your area. So I took that and I just turned the GPS off for a while, which is not something me as an intelligence analyst was comfortable with. But there's a lot of aspects, and if there's anything that I feel like maybe I do differently, and I'm not sure that I really do, but I do know that when I can learn from somebody who worked 10 years ago in that office, and I can learn from somebody who's just up and coming in this too, because there might be doing something that's different. Find those things that are going to work for me in my area. That was my number one goal. And I was like, look, I want to be able to relax. I want to be able to spend time with my family and have this be a job that I truly do enjoy. And I can't do that if that constant press of just stress and everything is on my shoulders like it was last year. I made mission on September 28th last year, and that was me getting 3 days off and then restarting. And I'm like, I'm not doing that again this year.
Well, it is the things that you are saying is really shooting down a lot of excuses that people grab onto out there.
I definitely hear a lot of excuses. I'm not somebody that ever made excuses for myself. If something wasn't working that I thought would work, I'm like, all right, well, that sucks, because I was really interested in being able to see if that works. But if it's not working in my area, I'm gonna go do something else, because I'm not here to waste my time.
Yeah, and I think that is, a lot of people have heard me say this before. I believe it's never, never, never always. If it's a recruiting idea,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably not always going to work.
True.
But it's unlikely that it will never work. That
True.
sometimes it might work. And what people have happen to them is they get into the groove of like how I get enlistments. Like
Mm-hmm.
me personally. And if you're open to how everyone gets enlistments and you try all those things and sponge up what is usable from somebody else, and none of this stuff is copyrighted, so you can take it.
Yes.
I think there's a great benefit to that. But what is really coming out to me, and I'm curious where it comes from, is how did you get this attitude? How did you
Oh,
get this attitude of, like, I'm just gonna get this sucker done?
um, would you believe me if I said it's genetic? My mom did 32 years active duty Army, and when she finally retired, like, it's funny because when I enlisted, I did not tell my mother until after I'd already signed everything, did the contract, everything, and then I called her and said, "Hey, Mom, I enlisted the United States Army today." So I grew up active duty Army and stuff, learning from like the example that she set for me, and that's something that I will always tell myself is like, hey, because I ask myself those questions a lot. It's like, how do I think my mom would do this? And then again, I'm always going to go back to the leadership that I've had because there's so much knowledge there. And I will ask questions not only of my own like bosses and section chiefs and stuff, but the other folks around, like not even just my own state anymore. I've been, blessed to meet folks from other states, and I ask them, what do you think is working? I go on Guard recruiter forums, and if there's a question I have, I'll search on there and I'll see if somebody else has asked that question, or if there is a creative solution to something, a problem that an applicant had that I'm like, I don't know if I can get this person in. Has this been asked before? That, and having a really good communication structure and relationship with the guidance counselors at the MEPS that I typically go to. I've used a couple of the other ones, but Syracuse MEPS, like I've been very thankful that not only have I learned so much about not only their process and the MEPS process, but like just really understanding how to use the AOC and how regulation works. And I will 100% like go by regulation, and then I will ask, okay, this is disqualifying, but how can I go about doing this? Is this a waiverable condition? So there was a couple, like I will always use this example. When you have somebody who's a little bit older, I met a prior service individual. He was the resource officer for one of my very large high schools, and he'd been out for 15 years, I want to say he had been out for. He did his first service of contract and completed his MSO with IRR way back in the day. Dude turned 50 while we were going through the process of getting him back and enlisted. And I was able, it took a while, but having that patience to say, hey, you've got these things coming down the funnel. You know that this is going to be right. And being able to see those real individuals who you can help. I can get this person in the Guard. This is something that's going to be beneficial for them. Soldier care is a huge part of my operation structure and how I go about doing things. So taking care of my people, that's just how I work as an NCO to begin with. But I do know that it's definitely, going back to what I said before, it's definitely something I learned from my mom. She was an NCO before she became an officer. So that example that was set before me, I think, is why I operate the way I do.
Well, and I feel like I have to make this disclaimer. We have not talked except to arrange this interview, because
Yep.
you would seem like a plant from things that I bring up all the time. And something, something that is significant, I think, is it's kind of all soldiers got a right to complain about their leadership. It's just kind of a rite of passage. But in recruiting, it seems to be bumped up. Like
Everything's more intense in recruiting.
Yeah.
The stress is definitely there.
And in the reality, what you're talking about is leadership does matter.
It does.
It matters for your benefit as a soldier. It also matters for your relationship with civilians that are becoming soldiers, for them to be led into the Guard.
I agree with that.
And it is something that many recruiters abandon the NCO part. And so I will get pushed back when I make this statement. Good soldiers, good NCOs make mission. They do. Now, when people will tell me, well, they're not a bad soldier, they're not a bad NCO, they just happen to be a bad recruiter. I think if you're a good NCO, you will figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
You just will. You will have that commitment to deliver a mission, and you will take the mantle of leadership up and lead civilians into the military.
I absolutely agree with that. I had an E7 that I worked for 2 years ago who, when he would make that statement all the time, he would say, why don't you have the intestinal fortitude to make this work? And I'm like, okay, I agree with that. Like, not to me, but to others around him. And I was like, that's one I'm going to keep in my pocket for later, to motivate myself. And sometimes, especially when it's something you don't want to do, or it's an event that, is like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll try to work this event different to see if it would be more beneficial to me this time. But taking that whole frustration from your about your job and then moving on from that and saying, telling yourself, have the intestinal fortitude to make this work for yourself.
And just
I don't
kind
know
of,
if everybody.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I'm not sure if everybody does that, but I know I do. Sometimes you just gotta have that chat with yourself.
Well, something that I think is liberating, and I'd be curious what you think about it, is I think it's very liberating to understand that most people don't want to join.
That's true.
So I'm going to present the opportunity and they're going to take it or leave it. But
Yes.
if they want to be in the take it column, then they really got to listen to me, and we got to do this on my pace, on my time. That's it. So when I get a no, it ain't about me. It's about them. And I feel
Mhm.
bad for them because they're going to miss out on all these opportunities that we have in our world-class organization. And they're going to be one of those people when they're 35 years old talking about how they almost joined or they wish they would have joined. So,
Yep.
what are your thoughts on that?
Because I'm definitely somebody that a lot of my recruits and soldiers and everything that I've been able to help join, for the most part, it's because I've spoken to them. So when I talk to people and I'm out talking, it doesn't matter if I'm at like Wegmans trying to get, lunch or something like that. It doesn't matter if I'm at, getting my GSA serviced and speaking to the technician, like, hey, you look like you could pass a PT test. Come here. Just having those conversations. So when I'm sitting there talking, and I've seen it when I'm even out to dinner with my friends, because recruiting never turns off. Like your brain never turns off with this stuff. I'm out to dinner with my friends and I'm having a good time with them, and this guy, is sitting next to me and he's like, oh, I heard you're in the military. I'm like, I am. Like, we're sitting there talking and he's just like, yeah, I really wish I would have joined. And I'm like, well, how old are you now? And he's like, oh, I'm 36. I'm only using this example because it happened the other day. And I'm like, well, you're not too old to join. And he's like, oh, well. And I'm like, there it is. It's not because you're, you should, coulda, shoulda, woulda. It's because you don't want to. And you know what? This isn't for everybody. It's the reason that our section chiefs, will sit there and say, hey, you've done something. When our person enlists, you've done something that less than 1% of the population is capable of doing. There's capable, and then there's want to. The folks who can don't always want to. And I'm not going to waste my time, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how successful you are, how, if you've got 1 enlistment or 10 enlistments for the FY, your time is valuable. Your time is absolutely valuable. And if someone's not picking up what you're putting down, on to the next. Charlie Mike. And that's all I keep telling myself is like, all right, I'm not going to be sad or upset about this. On to the next.
That's an awesome attitude. It's very difficult for people to get into that group. So you've been, with your short period of time being in the business, it is amazing to be that far along. So yeah, I would just commend it. It is.
Thank you.
You won't change somebody's attitude. You just
won't.
not in a short period of time. And in our business, we got to get people to go. We got to get people to respond to it, and they will have regret. I'm very confident in that. But I'd like to talk about what your approach to breaking into schools has been, because you mentioned that you have some rural and you have some more urban. So what has that approach been?
So I was lucky enough that I took on the RSID and area that I work was right at the back end of COVID. In 2022, I still had schools that weren't letting me in. For the most part, I will say that the thing that had made me successful into getting into the schools that wouldn't let me in before was getting in with the guidance counselors. There's no magic to that one. I have one high school who is, in that middle ground between really rural and urban. They have a pretty high population, but the area has a very high income rate. So a lot of these kids probably don't, like, you look at it and it's like, oh, well, this high school, they won't need to join the Guard. Their parents can pay for college. And I'm like, that's not true. So I'm going to work on making this my pet project. how do I get into this school? Because that is what the guidance counselors told me, the office, and everyone's like, oh, we don't need recruiters to come in here because our kids, they go to college, their parents can pay for their college. And what's funny, what got me into it was because I'm kind of a sarcastic person, and I've definitely got the dry and dark humor thing going on. I was speaking to one of their guidance counselors who had been a guidance counselor at one of my other high schools the year previous. And I was just like, Leanne, how do I get into this school? Like, I want to be able to not have to stand outside and wait for these kids to get out. And then another guidance counselor overheard me and butted into the conversation. She goes, well, our kids all get sports scholarships. I'm like, I watch Vestal's freaking games. Okay. They're not doing that great. If you guys go play Tioga again and you lose, none of you guys are getting scholarships. So how can I help your students? Because I got scholarships, I got money, I got free tuition. Let me tell you about this. And I swear to God, next week I was in. It was hilarious. So if you put yourself out into those uncomfortable positions and really try any avenue or approach to get into your schools, like that's the main thing. There are 2 schools in the area that absolutely, like, historically though, even before COVID, they weren't going to let any recruiters in. And honestly, on those, we have a program in New York called BOCES, where it's like a vocational tech program where everybody goes. That's how I get into the school through them. Is I'll meet students from that school at the BOCES, and then finding at those schools you can't go to, where are those kids going after school? What programs are they involved in? Having those questions, going to the Ys, the Boys and Girls Clubs, all of that. Like, if you can't reach a population of an enlistable, a portion of your enlistable population, where are you going to go? What are they doing after this? So those are the questions I kind of ask myself, and I'll try to involve myself in those programs.
Well, and there's a nugget for people to take from that, a couple nuggets. One is you don't get into a school by sending an email. I'm not saying don't send the email at some point in time, but what I'm saying, you get into school by going there and winning over a person, and then getting another person, and start collecting some people in that space.
We're in sales at the end of the day. We're in a people business. We're in sales. I mean, if that's how if you break everything that it is that we do down, it's a sales job, and that's a people job. So you're not going to win. It's so easy to ignore an email. Like, it's so freaking easy.
Yeah. Well, you brought up something another very high-speed recruiter from Missouri brought up during COVID times. It's like, okay, I can't go into school, but I know these students are going to get the energy drinks and vape stuff at this convenience store before school and then after school. So that can be my office for a period of time during every day. And there's no gatekeeper to that space. And the overall thought process is you're going to figure out a way.
It is. So I will use this example. I have Binghamton University, which is a pretty I will say hoity-toity kind of college. They're the types that it's like, oh, well, we have, same kind of mindset. We have money. We don't really need to join the military and everything like that. And it is college. So there comes like, oh, if I'm in college, I don't want to miss, this semester or that semester. I get that. So what I ended up doing with that is, my predecessor had utilized the ROTC office and stuff. So I started really focusing on a different way to go about doing that with working Binghamton University students. So, laundromats. They all go to the laundromats to have, they all wear clothes and then have to go wash those clothes somewhere. And the other thing is on campus, there's a couple clubs and everything that I was able to, a couple of my soldiers ended up going to Binghamton University out of high school and stuff when they got back to training. So I was like, tell me how. So talking to people, walking around on campus, in or out of uniform, like, sometimes soft sell is a good way to get around. Like, oh, I had a girl, I was in uniform and a girl stopped me asking me about my bun and stuff. So I was teaching her how to do a bun. And then all of a sudden I had a group of like 13 people around me just watching what it is I was doing. I'm not saying make a spectacle of yourself, but sometimes if you draw interest from a bunch of people, that could be a way in too. That is a creative option.
Well, and there's some things there that you mentioned that are like intel analysts, human intelligence type of techniques, but one of the ones that we just overlook a lot, that you mentioned, is those individuals that we've enlisted go off to school somewhere, and they know the ins and outs. The individuals that we've enlisted that are still in high school, what is the angle? What is the need? What is the thing that's a big deal right now? Kind of focus grouping those individuals that you already have relationships with.
Exactly. That goes back to another thing that I've been taught my whole time come up is, service after the sale, right? So if you're still taking care of your soldiers, like I still talk to some of my soldiers who have been in their units for, a year or so now, and help them out, whether it is, if they're doing their first tuition assistance packet, I help them with that. Like I help them with any admin issues. If they're having issues with their unit, I'm like, okay, or their leadership. I'm like, what if you ask them this question or looked at this situation this way? Maybe having that little bit of a mentorship approach with your soldiers, even after they've already, completed their battle handoffs and gone to their units, it has served me well. I've been told that it takes a few years for your referrals to start, coming in and everything. I've gotten 2 enlistments this year off of referrals, and that was from enlistments that I didn't even count on happening, because when I did my analysis at the beginning of the year, I said, okay, so many students were, so many of my enlistments were going to come from a high school. Then this is how many I need to get out of a college. This is how many I'm going to get out of canvassing and prospecting. When I made that plan for myself, I did not include referrals because I was under the impression that I wouldn't be getting them in that fast. And weirdly, I am getting referrals. So like, I'm thankful for that. But that's also something I feed off of as an NCO, is that soldier care issue. Like I will make sure my people are taken care of, whether or not they still belong to me or not.
Well, that's awesome. We're getting close on time here, but there's something I think that you can provide a benefit to everybody that listens to the podcast. You mentioned that you were basically working to the very last day last year.
Yes.
And we got a lot of recruiters out there that is the circumstance they're in this year. They're going to be working through the summer to the end to make mission. So your advice to those individuals of how to have the fortitude to drive through to get it done, and grinding out the rest of this mission that they have, maybe they got a long way to go. What would you say to those individuals?
Stop yourself where you are right now and have that talk. If this is how many enlistments I need to get, knowing that after April everything dries up, so you're not going to get the high school kids and stuff like that. What are you going to do for the summer? If there's a creative plan that you need to formulate, or someone else you want to talk to help make that plan, but you have to sit yourself down right now to make that, because you're kind of late in the game. Like I don't want to sound rude or blunt or anything, but that needed to be done already. If you're somewhere in your process where like, I don't know, or it's a question mark about whether or not you're going to make mission, then if you need to figure out where those people are coming from, that's the plan you need to make. Sit down and really take a look at your battle space. Where, if I can't count on this, this aspect or this place, for this pool, if you will, for the fish to come out of, where are they going to come from? And you need to sit down and have that real conversation with yourself and organize yourself in a way moving forward that you will make that happen. Like I said at the beginning, like I have no magic formula. It was because I sat myself down, did that, and said, I will put in the work to make this happen. And I was working a lot.
Well, and I do think that there's a thought process out there that there must be that easy button that high performers are doing. And I always communicate to all recruiters, they're not doing extraordinary things, but what they are doing is focused. They got a plan. They're going to
methodical.
They're going to work that plan. And they're committed to doing what it takes to make mission. Then you have to have that. That's our start point. So, well, I have to tell you, based on your experience in recruiting, it's very impressive and very useful, the things that you have to say. And I know that other soldiers out there can benefit from it. And
well, thank you.
I appreciate you jumping on this interview and sharing your way of doing things with everybody that's out there. And
Yeah.
keep on doing what you're doing because it's working and you're being successful.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I will continue doing everything that I absolutely can.
Awesome.